First off, let me go over some of the key details for the Vagabond Motorsports Fender Eliminator for the new R3. It's made from aerospace grade 5000 series aluminum. It is CNC laser cut and CNC bent for a precise fit. It comes with stainless steel studs pre-installed, pressed in, so that there's no loose hardware, and a very flush underside appearance. It includes a rubber grommet for the wiring loom, as well as 2 rubber bumpers to minimize any noise you could possibly get from vibration. The whole Fender Eliminator is finished in a UV resistant satin black powder coat. Also included are 2 sets of washers. You'd use the stainless steel set of washers to reuse the factory Yamaha turn signals, and you're going to use these 2 black plastic shoulder washers if you'd like to use aftermarket turn signals that use the common M10 stud. Now, most of the tools you're going to need are actually included in the tool pack underside of the passenger seat. That includes a Phillips screwdriver, a 4mm Allen hex key, and 8 and 10mm hex wrenches. In order to reuse the factory turn signals, you will need a pair of tin snips or dikes. I'm going to use slightly different tools just to make the job a little faster, but the tools included on the tool pack will work if you need them. Now, the first part of the installation procedure is going to be to remove the factory rear fender as a unit. And we're going to start with removing the passenger seat, the central plastic panel, and the rider seat in order to get to those bolts. We'll use the key to pop the passenger seat off. Set that aside. I'm going to use a 4mm Allen key to remove this center panel. Screw on either side. Once the screws are out, there's 2 plastic teeth that hold it in. You just have to slightly separate, and you can release that panel. Set that aside as well. The final part is going to be 2 8mm hex head bolts. I'm going to remove those with electric screwdriver. Once those are out, you can pick up the rear of the seat and slide it out. Set that aside as well. We're going to remove this plastic storage tray that sits underneath the passenger seat. There's 2 plastic rib nuts that hold those in. You're going to use the Phillips head screwdriver to release them, and then just pull them out. Once those 2 are out, you can slide forward the plastic tray, set it aside. And the last bit, before we actually unbolt it, is going to be to remove the electrical connections that run to the rear fender. So the easiest way to start that is to take your main fuse, which is sitting in a big rubber boot, slide it off the 2 middle posts, and kind of set it aside, because all our wiring runs underneath that. You can remove the 3 wiring looms that are coming through that central hole out of its plastic clip. And the last bit is going to be to remove the connectors, or disconnect the connectors for the right and the left turn signal and the license plate light. The turn signal connectors are both covered, or protected, I guess, by this clear plastic shield. So you kind of unravel that, and then you have a gray and a black connector. Kind of pull up on the tooth with 1 finger and release. So those are the 2 turn signals. They can be pulled out through the other wiring. And the last thing you're going to want to disconnect is the license plate light. And that should be able to follow back that 3rd connector. It's kind of a rather large white connector. In this bike it is blue and brown. And disconnect that and pull it through. So we should have 3 connectors that are headed towards the rear fender. We're going to want to disconnect those before we pull the fender. The last step to get the rear fender out are going to be the 4 10mm hex bolts that are actually going to studs on the rear fender. So you're going to use your 10mm socket and remove those 4 nuts. And you have to be careful not to drop any of the nuts down into the rear subframe of the bike. Obviously, on the last one, you want to go a little slower and hold the rear fender. Drop one. Hold the rear fender with your other free hand and you can remove the whole fender as an assembly from the motorcycle. Now once you've got your rear fender off the motorcycle, you have to break this back shell down to get the turn signals and the license plate light out of it. Start by taking this C-shaped plastic trim piece off, and there's 4 of those same riv nuts or riv screw rivets, and you release them by unscrewing with the Phillips screwdriver the center and then just pulling them out. So there's 2 up front and 2 in the back. And you will not be reusing any of those, so you can put those aside. Now we have to take this large plastic shell out of it, and there's actually 6 4mm Allen key headed bolts here, and then 4 Phillips head screws, 2 on the sides and 2 here, that attach this whole back panel. So we'll start by removing the 4mm head screws, and the ones up front have kind of aluminum bushings with them. So keep those. These will none of these will be reused, but you may want to put it back together and keep it in case you ever need to return it to stock. One more Allen headed screw. Now, the second part are these 4 Phillips head screws. You remove out 2 out the sides that are underneath the turn signals. And finally, these can be a little tricky with the screwdriver included in the tool bag because it can be very tight. So we remove the back panel, and you can see the wiring is held. You can pull the wiring through the first hole, and then you're going to want to remove the wiring loom one by one through the little gap in the plastic retainer. Do that for the first retainer and the second retainer. At this point, we're ready to take the turn signals and the license plate light off. So the factory Yamaha turn signals are very easy to remove. You pull back the 2 rubber kind of ears and pull the plastic plug out of them. After you've done that, you can just pull them out of the rear fender, and you can slide the connectors through these plastic plugs. Those will not be reused. Pull the other side out. Set that aside. And the last bit is going to be removing the license plate light. And that is also done with 2 Phillips head screws. Now these we're going to reuse both the hardware and the rubber bushing and spacers that they use. So we're going to want to keep everything intact. So once we get that removed, we can pull out the license plate light. Now, the one thing that you're going to want to take out as well, the license plate light has 2 bushings that have these steel centers to them. We're going to take out both the bushings or grommets and their steel centers, and we are going to reuse those, so make sure you keep track of those. After this, the rear fender is done. The only thing we have to do is remove our license plate. Quick shout out to the guys at Motor World, and that's going to get put on after we get the Fender Eliminator on the bike. Now if you're going to reuse the Yamaha turn signals, we have to remove this soft rubber part so that we can mount straight up to the fender eliminator at that seam. And you have to remove the 8mm nut that's down in there, and that comes out with the 8mm socket. It's not quite that right. And once that's out, you can pull off this rubber boot. Now the one tricky part is there is this metal retainer, and you cannot get this metal retainer off with the boot because it's caught by your electrical connector. So rather than clipping your electrical connector and having to resolder all that, it's much easier to remove this metal retainer with a quick snip of the dikes or tin snips. So in order to clip off this little teardrop retainer, just take your tin snips and go for kind of the thinner section, minding not to cut any of your wires, and break it free. And you can use the, not cut again, but slowly open it up just enough so you can remove that retainer. Once you've done that, you can always flatten that retainer back out and stick it back on if you ever want to go back to a full stock setup with these turn signals. Last step is just to thread out the electrical connector from that rubber isolator. So now what you're left with is a much shorter factory turn signal, and that's the part we're going to use on the Fender Eliminator. So now you're ready to start assembling your Fender Eliminator. Before we actually install it onto the motorcycle, we'll assemble all the lights first. So you're going to actually want to start by removing the rubber grommet that comes installed from Vagabond, and you're going to reinstall that in a little bit, but first you're going to thread everything through. So I'm going to show you what you need to do to install a factory turn signal and an aftermarket turn signal first. So in your kit that you get, you're first going to want it for the factory turn signals. Open these guys up really quick. You're going to use, it comes with 6 washers, and you're going to use 3 on per side. So the washers are fairly easy to tell apart. You're going to have 2 larger 10mm washers, 2 lock washers, and then 2 smaller M6 fender washers. So for each turn signal, you're going to use 1 set of 3. And we'll install the left factory turn signal. So you can tell in the Fender Eliminator there's a large hole, and then there's a key, a slot, and that slot is allowing the turn signal wiring to pass through there without pinching or rubbing off. So it's important that you line those up. You're going to start by threading the turn signal connector through the large hole, and you can pull that through. Then you're going to want to slowly and carefully align the turn signal, and there's a little pilot or a larger diameter portion of that stud, and that should slip right in, and that's the point where you know it's ready to be assembled on the backside. So once you get to that point, you're going to install one of the big washers. Move that back. You're gonna assemble a washer stack, and I'm gonna move this over here so it's easier to work on. But the washer stack is a large diameter washer, the lock washer, then the smaller of the 3 washers, and you're going to finish that all off with the factory nut. So you can start to tighten that, and you're going to want to, you can kind of jiggle it in there to make sure it is there we go. You have to adjust it a little bit to get to the point where everything kind of sits nicely in. All the washers start to slide over the different parts of the turn signal, and you're going to tighten that up until it gets nice and snug, and that's going to lock in that turn signal. And you have a little bit of adjustability in here, depending on what kind of license plate you're running and how much clearance you want to the back of the bike. And the last part of that is you're going to use your 8mm wrench to tighten that nut and flatten that lock washer out. And you can do a bit of this once it's on its bike, so you can kind of finalize the angle at which the turn signal is pointing. But you should be able to get a pretty good idea for it on the bench. So you'll definitely feel the washer compress and start to get a lot more force on that screw. You can go pretty tight, but you definitely don't need to go ultra tight. And there'll be a little bit of give, and you can tighten that up once it's on the bike. Now for aftermarket turn signals, such as these LED units you can get for cheap off Amazon, places like that, you're going to use the black plastic shoulder washers that are also included with the kit. So with this kit you have the ability to choose or switch at any point, and it's a simple modification. So you use these black plastic pieces have a small shoulder on them, and that shoulder is actually going to go into that hole in the Fender Eliminator. So for example, you would take off the nut that comes with your turn signal, and you're going to thread on the shoulder washer, and the shoulder, the little extra piece of material, is going to point in towards the Fender Eliminator. So after that, it's kind of the same gig. You're going to thread it through the Fender Eliminator. I'm going to flip it upside down, and that plastic shoulder washer is going to trim out that hole so that you don't have any gap. Now after that, you're going to thread on your M10 nut that should come with your turn signal and tighten it up. And you can do the same thing. So once it's on the motorcycle, you can adjust the angle, but that gives you kind of a good idea of the two installation techniques. So you use one set of washers for the factory turn signal and a different set for aftermarket turn signals, such as these LED units. Now it does need to be mentioned that for LED units you will need to either splice on a new factory Yamaha connector or cut off the factory Yamaha connector on your existing turn signal and either solder or crimp them back on in order to get them properly wired back up. And those parts are not included in this kit. So once you've got your turn signals on, and I'm going to leave one of each on this for the rest of the installation, we're ready to assemble the license plate light. So like I mentioned, we are going to reuse the factory hardware in this respect. So you got two rubber grommets, two kind of steel centers or mushroom cores, and then you have the two factory bolts, and you're going to reuse all of this. So you're going to start by installing the rubber grommets into the holes in the Fender Eliminator. You should be able to kind of simply push them in and maybe pull a little bit from the backside to get them into those holes, and they should be relatively easy to do so. Once you've got that done, you're going to install from the outside in the two steel centers, and it should start to tighten things up a little bit. Now at that point, you're ready to install the license plate light through here with the factory bolts coming from the backside. But before we do that, we're going to get the wiring on the top side squared away. So the first step is going to be to thread your turn signals through this kind of oval hole on the top of the Fender Eliminator. And we're going to grab our license plate light, and that's also going to go through. And one thing you can do, the license plate light is going to come with this kind of rubber boot, and there's no reason you need to keep that, so you can remove that from this light for this installation. And the original Fender may have helped keep some water out, but it does not serve that purpose here. So we're also going to want to thread the license plate light harness through at this point. It's going to make the whole installation a lot easier if you do this now. So we've got our three, and that cable is going to sit in this notch. It's kind of hard to see. It's sit in this notch between the two tabs to mount it once we get it all set up. So we're going to get our three cables through, and now we're going to install that grommet to keep everything nice and secure and prevent kind of chafing from ever going through the jacket and that cable. So you're going to take the rubber grommet that you pulled out of the Fender Eliminator that we include, and you're going to start with the license plate connector. Whoops. I'm going to thread that guy through. And this one's a little tight, but the other two are going to be way easier. So kind of stretch the grommet around that connector and then feed through the two turn signals. And this is done without the grommet being installed, so that everything actually is nice and snug once it is installed. So once you've got that together, you've got your 3 wiring looms going through the grommet loose. You're going to actually want to install the grommet into the Fender Eliminator. And this is a little tricky, but you want to start on one end of that oval slot and kind of seat it, and then you just follow it around by slowly pushing it in. So once you've got that grommet installed from the top side, it's worth it to check the bottom, and you may have a couple wrinkles. You can pull up the lip with your fingers and smooth it out. So the last step is going to be to actually screw together or bolt on the license plate light. And so you're going to want to remove all the slack in the cable and slowly pull the license plate light up to its mounts. And so you're not going to use these 2 tabs. You're using the 2 threaded posts that the factory mount uses. And so once you're close, you're going to take the 2 factory license plate light screws, and you're going to take your Phillips screwdriver, and you're going to use the factory, or the Fender Eliminator comes with these 2 slots punched in it, and those are going to be up against the plastic on the bike once it's installed, so it's still going to be sealed from the elements, but are going to give you nice straight access to the installation to tighten up those screws. So it's useful to start these screws by hand, and you may want to push the license plate or the turn signal looms a little bit out of the way, but to give you an idea, you should be able to get your screw driver through those holes or those slots and get to those license plate bosses. Now that's one. I don't go full tightness quite yet. I'm going to push that other one out of the way. Once you get a couple threads in there, you can go start it off, switch to the actual screwdriver. Now these, remember, they're going into plastic, so there's no point in really tightening them up, but you do want them to be fairly snug. Let me just snug up both sides equally. There we go. So now the license plate light is mounted, and it should be fairly rigid. It still has some give from the rubber bushings, but the good news is this is all hidden underneath the tail section of the bike, and that kind of nice pocket the R3 has. So the last step is going to be to snug up, just kind of pull through all the excess cable. And the nice thing about that grommet we have is that it's going to keep that nice and tight, and it's not going to allow it to slowly loosen up, and it's going to seal out really as much as water is reasonable. So at this point, the Fender Eliminator as an assembly is ready to be installed on the motorcycle. So we're going to move it back to the bike. And now we can reassemble or reinstall the Fender Eliminator onto the motorcycle. So you're going to take your 3 connectors and you're going to slide them through the top rectangular opening in your rear fender. Now that's not the hole they came out of originally, but the way it's set up on this Fender Eliminator is that there's room for the rubber grommet here, so it much better protects the wires from chafing, and the hole is otherwise unused. So you just need to line up the 4 stainless steel studs with the corresponding 4 holes in the fender. It should be a fairly easy fit, and then thread on your 4 screws. Move the camera around so you can get a better feel for that. So once you've got the Fender Eliminator up and a nut or 2 on there, it's just, you can see the studs sitting up. You just need to push with one hand up and thread on the the 4 factory locking nuts. And you're going to take your 10mm wrench and tighten them up. Got our 10mm wrench and the electric screwdriver. We're going to snug these guys up. Alright. Now we're going to take you can see the rubber grommet fits perfectly in that kind of rectangular opening. And that's going to protect these wires from ever getting rubbed during engine vibration or anything like that. So the next step is we're going to push the 3 wire looms back through the factory kind of plastic clip, and we're going to thread them kind of back from whence they came. So we're going to start with the turn signal, and you'll notice these are now going to have kind of a service loop to them. So do your best to kind of coil them up and tuck them down out of the way. You're not going to want them loose under the seat getting vibrated, but there's plenty of room. So once you've got the license plate light connected, you have to do the same for the right and left turn signals. So you're going to kind of thread them underneath the kind of main wiring harness into that kind of space that's down there. You're going to pull them through. Now you'll connect gray to gray. Gray is left turn signal for reference, although if you're just using the factory turn signals, just match the colors. Now you will have a rather large service loop here, and my recommendation is going to be to make an S loop, and that entire loop is going to get protected in that factory clear sleeve. Now it'll be a little tighter, but the procedure is the same, where you feed the first, use the large slit to feed the strap through, and then pull the little tab through the skinny slit, and that locks in the 2 extra teeth. Do it one more time on the back. Strap through the bigger slit, wrap it around, and feed the end through the smaller of the 2 slits. And there you go. So at this point, that wiring is back where it was originally. And the last step is going to be to reinstall your main fuse back on its 2 sheet metal posts. So you just kind of slide it down, make sure it's thoroughly seated, and that is good. So to reinstall the driver's seat, make sure all your cables are tucked out of the way, and slide your seat forward into that tooth. And by hand you can get started the 2 8mm hex head bolts. Once you're sure you're started your threads and you won't cross thread them, go ahead and tighten those up. Next up, it's going to be that central panel. It's going to slide under the rider's seat, and you're going to want to click in 2 teeth. Then there's 2 screws that use your 4mm Allen head to secure. There's no need to over tighten these. Just snug is good. So before we attach the passenger seat, the last step is going to be to put in this plastic tray, and you'll notice that's going to slide into the exact same gap as our wires. That's going to kind of pin them down, keep them nice and snug. And then you're just going to push in the 2 screw rivets, and the way those install is you push on the outside to actually get it in the hole, and then push on the center, and you should hear a click, and they are locked in. That last guy. There we go. So you can see your wires are all nicely contained. No danger of them kind of chafing. And the last step is going to be to reinstall the passenger seat. Start from the front, get it in its screws, slide it forward, push it down, and you are done. You can go ahead and reinstall your license plate. We've still got the temp tags. And our Fender Eliminator has 2 rubber bumpers, and those are going to hang out underneath your license plate. And particularly on a twin bike like this, that potentially could vibrate a good amount. It prevents that license plate from buzzing or doing anything like that, or even cracking under that vibration. So we're going to go ahead and tighten these up. Grab the screwdriver to do that, but otherwise you are done. And just to wrap up, we got the full installation complete. Swapped out the LED turn signal for the second factory one for testing. You can see the clearance between the turn signal and the bodywork. As we go around, you can see the license plate light is on and fully illuminating the plate, even though it is nicely tucked in to that pocket on the tail section of the R3. As we go underneath, you can see, because we use the pressed in studs, there are no exposed fasteners under there, so it's a very nice, clean, tidy closeout of the undertail. And with that, the installation video is complete. I'd like to thank you guys for watching, and hopefully you consider buying your Fender Eliminator from Vagabond Motorsports. Our products can be found on Amazon, eBay, and our own website, www.vagabondmotorsports.com. Thank you.